my channel, Reading Little Blue Books out loud. This right here is a little blue book. It happens to be Little Blue Book number 1270, and it is entitled Visits Among the Mormons, and it is written by Fred Bair. And this is copyrighted somewhere in probably the late 20s or early 1930s. And if you're a Mormon, you may not like this book. But it's filled with the thoughts and views of the early part of the last century, not today's century. So let's get started, shall we? We have some chapters. First chapter is Visits Among the Mormons, written by Fred Bair. Next chapter is Ebenezer Hansen, Polygamist and Patriarch, written by Don Lewis. And the final chapter, An Intellectual Christian, written by Gaylord Du Bois. And let's get started. Visits Among the Mormons, Fred Bair. When one kind of bunk meets another kind of bunk, almost anything is liable to happen. Sometimes the collision is a very simple matter. For example, a number of male Christians from medieval Europe snoop around in Palestine until they come in contact with a number of male Saracens, and then the two gangs try to cut each other's hearts out, and that is all there is to it. But when instead of Palestine it is Utah that the all-pestering Christians invade, things are more complicated. First of all, for not all the invaders are males, and even a large majority of those among them who are masculine in gender, as gender is reckoned by consensus takers, are, to all practical crusading intents and purposes, essentially feminine. Their own vaunt that they are he-men, to the contrary, notwithstanding. The monument to the seagull. I use the word Methodist for Protestant Gentiles in general because the Methodists are typical. The Protestants I refer to are nothing more nor less than the general run of American tourists, creatures indistinguishable from locusts, or shall I say they are indistinguishable from Gauls. At all events, the story of the locusts and the Gauls will make a good starting point. The entertainer saint takes his or her flock of Gentile visitors at the temple grounds in Salt Lake City to the monument to the seagull, a pole with a golden gull perched on top of it. The story told by the entertainer is this. When the Mormons were having their first good yield, I mean when it looked as though they were going to have it, hell broke loose in the form of 1 billion locusts that came to eat up the crops. Then it looked as though the Mormons were all going to starve and leave their bones to be bleached by the beautiful Utah sun. Well, the locusts got under old Brigham's hide like nothing else had gotten under it since the horseflies that were sent to tickle a smile out of him on the big migration. I forgot whether the Lord was in the habit of sending these annoyances to try him, or whether Satan sent them out of pure devilment. But be that as it may, it was the Lord that finally came along with the happy remedy for the locust plague. Yet old Brigham and all his followers had to do some tall praying before the Lord would listen. When the Lord heard his chosen people pray, he turned loose out of his infinite wisdom as many Gauls as there are grains of salt in Great Salt Lake. Gauls with belly capacities like pelicans and albatrosses. These Gauls descended on the locust and ate them all up. Then the Lord whisked them back to the blue sky, and the saints praised the Lord with song and prayer. And that is how it came to pass that the Mormons consider the Gaul to be the bird of holiness, as the Hindus consider the white elephant to be a holy quadruped. When the entertainer has wound up by giving the figures of the cost of the Gaul on the pole, the Methodists look deeply impressed, as though they had heard a parable straight from the lips of Jesus. The modern atmosphere Most of the entertainers are like ushers at historical places the world over. But in important hours, like Sabbath noon, when the main rush of business is on the temple grounds, a man of far vaster competence donates his time to the throng of aliens. He is a typical Westerner, big businessman, go-getting, moose-like, elk-like, Shriner-like, genial, cordial, brusque, just the sort to make a hit with the tourists, most of whom are working people on a holiday. They are flattered because he seems distinguished, and also because there is nothing antediluvian about him. He tells them about his big sheep ranch and about the banks and other businesses he is interested in, airs his democratic prejudice, and talks about his devotion to his wife and children. And like all other ushers, he corrects the mistaken ideas about Mormonism that have sprung up among the Gentiles. Above all, he speaks of the fiery love of country that burns in his breast, of the younger generation of Mormons. Of course they... Nope, skipped a page. Of course they... Skipped a couple pages. Of course they have also a sectional patriotism. What virtuous young man anywhere has not? But the day is past when Utah is their all in all. The Mormons are now more loyal to the USA than the New Yorkers are, which I think is true. I got it from a convincing source that the Gentile ex-serviceman is given the preference as to any political job of the lower order, railroad bull for instance, over a Mormon non-ex-serviceman. But what I am interested in is the psychological effects of Mormon entertaining upon the visiting ladies. I heard some half-dozen of them commenting to each other about their impression of the charming fellow and his religion, and I think they were representative of the myriads of their sex and faith, who take a sample suck at the Mormon keg each year. Most Methodist ladies derive their original notion of Mormonism from Conan Doyle's A Study in Scarlet, or from Zane Grey's Riders of the Purple Sage and the Rainbow Trail. So they are more than a little surprised to find that the Mormons belong to the same baubled trolley car, telephone, radio, moving picture civilization that they do. I don't mean that they are necessarily surprised that the Mormons have these things, for they can find that out of the movies. They can find that out the movies at home. But when they find that the Mormons react to this sort of environment in much the same way that they do, and that the Mormons are silly about religion in a manner almost identical with that of other people, they have to acknowledge that the Mormons seem to be good, sensible, law-abiding citizens. But then, at the same time, the country has an infernally queer look, and what may not be hidden in those mountains. It is not possible that there is still some secret village to which grim elders ride on dark horses on dark nights to visit kidnapped young wives. The Holy of Holies. And what is hidden in that bastilish-looking temple? The charming entertainer aforementioned, and the other guides as well, apologize for not being able to take visitors into it. The first few Gentiles who were allowed to enter it soon after its completion raised hell in it, or did something of that sort. And that wasn't at all nice, and will never be repeated. But the ladies are assured that no carnal orgies, or anything of that kind, go on within those sanctified walls. Nothing but what is very decorously holy. And then the guide goes on to say that not even he or any other Mormon besides a few old cactus thorns have ever been permitted to go to the top. And he asks the ladies to admire the architecture from the outside, and tells them old Brigham himself was the boss architect. The truth is, it is a mongrel conglomeration of, if ever there was one, and would make an unusually horrid country jail. The Mormons don't know that, but the young ladies can feel it in their marrow. Oh, how awfully romantic Mormonism is. The Mousetrap. It is in the tabernacle that the Mormons entertain the ladies to best advantage. A great fuss is made about old Brigham's engineering abilities. He had no nails, so it had to be put together with wooden pegs. It is another work of art, another thing of beauty, the guide tells you. Really, it is about as beautiful as a cheese, and looks like one of those round, red mouse traps with holes all around it so that 4 mice can be caught at one setting. But instead of round, it is elliptical. Oscar Wilde said it is shaped like a soup kettle. And it will hold many more than 4 mice, and has more than 4 holes of entry. The charming entertainer tells the ladies that practical old Brigham designed it with all those doors around it because he figured that otherwise, if it were to catch fire on some bright Sunday, the stampeding faithful would clog up the doorways before enough of them could get out to serve as the seed for a new crop of Moroni's followers. This far-sprawling tabernacle is near enough to the top-heavy, jagged temple to render their disparity in style very enhancing. If Barnum and Bailey were to pitch camp within the walls of the Salt Lake Temple grounds, the tent and the tabernacle would resemble each other far more than the tabernacle resembles the temple. It is in the tabernacle, just after the noonday organ recital, that the charming entertainer puts in his most masterly licks for the godliness of the Mormon Church and the many virtues of the hard-working Mormon people. He invites the visiting ladies and gentlemen to join them, or at least to come to their service and sample desert divinity, particularly the ladies. He says a great deal about the purity of heart and the simple sincerity of the Mormon missionaries who go to the 47 states of the Gentile. And then he suddenly calls on a bashful young Mormon in the audience to verify his statements. It quickly turns out that the young Mormon is in training to be one of the missionaries. The entertainer paternally calls him Tom. The ladies all look at him and dower him with their holiday smiles, and he gives back a blush for every smile. Despite his tan, begotten by toiling in the sun, the entertainer asks him questions about his evangelistic attitude, and then asks the ladies if they will be nice to him if he should happen to get into any of their communities. Unanimously and empathetically they say yes. How could they help but feel an instinctive liking for Tom? Could any cold-blooded polygamist blush as Tom blushes? And yet, this Tom is a Mormon. He has been in that sinister temple, and the Lord has given him commandments, so the young Methodist ladies don't know just what to think. It is if this shy, native-looking young man were to take off his neat white shirt, might he not expose the mark of stern old Brigham's moral branding iron? Ergo, Tom is a very alluring enigma, and I would wager that is the psychological reason behind the majority of Mormon conversions among the fair sex. An overmastering curiosity to see Tom with his shirt off. Ooh. As to say just how many ladies per annum the Mormons actually succeed in snaring, I haven't the figures at hand. But according to their own statistics, which may or may not be valid, these Latter-day Saints of Utah entice enough flies to keep their web always asquirm with fresh meat. And if all the prospects whom they have charmed halfway had gotten entirely entangled, the apostles of Moroni would by now be dictating to the League of Nations and setting up the Book of Mormon as the thou shalt not contradict of a new Inquisition. I have no doubt but what they could gobble all Methodism at a few gulps if they had the wit to hire a couple such charlatans as Amy, the Lily Maid of Los Angeles. We must not overlook the melodious Mormon pipe organ, nor dare we forget the marvelous acoustics. These two phenomena are the tabernacle's main glories. The Mormons are ferociously and luciferiously proud of their organ, as Rastus was of his, and they are determined to establish a world's record for it, one way or another. It is not quite the whoppingest organ in the world, so it is the sweetest toned organ in the world. Do you know why? Because Brigham built it. The Lord helped helped him do it, and they built it, if I haven't the facts miserably twisted, without any nails. Needless to say, the music it masticates is presbyterianically soulful. But the loveliest thing about the tabernacle is that it has acoustic properties. If ever you hear any schoolmarm or any miss or missus whatsoever prating about the acoustic properties of her church, you can safely bet her your last pair of pants that she has been to Salt Lake City. Such is the green turban worn by the sophisticate who has made her pilgrimage to the Utah Mecca. The will to acoustic evaluation. Isn't there something awe-inspiring about hearing pins drop when the usher who drops them is so far away from you that you would have to be a world-famous pitcher to have any hope of hitting him with a rotten egg? Here again we have evidence of what handiwork could be produced when Brigham collaborated with the Lord. The soup kettle is so perfectly formed that when a mouse squeaks its little prayer at midnight, it sounds to the angels as though an elephant were bellowing. The Protestant young lady who has once been an oyster in that soup, my metaphors are modeled and mixed after the manner of Mormon architecture, will never forget those mysterious acoustics. And she will never cease wondering what the Mormons do in that strange temple of theirs, where the acoustics are so tightly bottled up. Mouse acoustics, elephant acoustics, captured Methodist choir singer acoustics, or who knows what. Let us shrug our shoulders as to the temple and merely observe that while the Mormons have turned themselves into 100% Americans and are being very careful to stroke the federal government's fur the right way, the students would like to hear him. Permission was granted. Oh, sorry, I must have skipped a page. That doesn't make any sense. Yep, I did skip a page. There we go. Okay, let me backtrack here for the sentence that is broken up. Federal government's fur the right way. They still obey the Lord's commandment unto them, as they obeyed of old. They are being fruitful and multiplying. Is Utah free? Don Lewis. Scott Nearing came to Salt Lake a few months ago, despite vigorous protests from the American Legion and the sons and daughters of the American Revolution, and despite open threats from the Chamber of Commerce. He gave his lecture, the second on the university's Masterminds and Artists series. Liberals the country over smirked with glee, thinking that the super patriots had, at least in one American city, been routed. It appeared that a great victory had been won for liberals, but most people did not see the Ethiopian in the kindling pile. Little racist undertones. The members of the Board of Regents of the University of Utah permitted Scott Nearing to fill his contracted agreement, not because they believe in free speech or free discussion or free anything, but because they were afraid of the adverse criticism they knew would follow if they barred him, especially criticism from outside the state. They chose the lesser of two evils. It had been but 10 years before that 20-odd of the best teachers in the university resigned in disgust, the incident that is now known as the infamous migration. And Utah has never lived down the disgrace. The Nearing case is now called in official circles a grave misfortune. Extreme care will be taken that never again shall such a mendacious character be engaged to lecture in Salt Lake under the auspices of the state's highest institution of learning. Henceforth the university will sponsor Richard Halliburtons, who hold their audiences spellbound, telling daring tales of cliff scalings, or Lou Serrets, who recite their own verse and rant stupid moralities. Those who oppose the status quo to any appreciable degree shall not lecture for the university, nor shall they be safe or long remain on its faculty. The president, the majority of the regents, and most of the faculty do not believe in academic freedom. Any teaching or public utterance that disagrees with the moral and economic views of the yokels who infest the villages of the state is license, whatsoever that may mean. Those who are inclined to believe that the regents acted in good faith in the Nearing case would do well to study what happened when another communist appeared. Albert Weisbord was in Salt Lake the month after Nearing, under the auspices of the International Labor Defense League. Some of the more alert students heard this lecture given at the Labor Temple, and thought it would be highly desirable to have him speak on the campus. A committee of 2 was chosen to secure the president's permission. The spokesman, a Hindu, said, "Albert Weisbord is in the city. He was the leader of the Passaic strike, a graduate of Harvard, and a good speaker. The students would like to hear him. Permission was granted to hold the meeting in one of the classrooms." And I think we'll stop there. Looks like a good place. This has been part 1 of book number 1270 of the Little Blue Book series, titled Visits Among the Mormons, written by Fred Bair and others. Thanks for listening, and I will see you in part 2.